She didn't show up in the history books. No headlines. No statues. Not even a footnote. But Vladimir Putin never forgot her. This isn't about diplomacy, war, or politics. This is the story he buried beneath the silence. A woman whose name no longer appears in any file, but whose absence still shapes his most private moments. Why did she vanish? Why does he never speak of her? And what was left behind in a box no one was ever supposed to open? The name that was never written down. They say memory is a liar. But some memories don't need words, dates, or names. Some stay not because we remember, but because we can't forget. It was 1979. Putin wasn't President Putin yet. Not even KGB Putin. He was just Volodya, a young, sharp, hungry man in Leningrad, balancing law school and silent ambition. His eyes already had that calculating distance. The kind of gaze that took in the world in full but gave back almost nothing. And that's when she appeared. She wasn't loud. She wasn't particularly beautiful, at least, not in the way others defined it. But she had presence. The kind that entered a room quietly and somehow still rearranged it. She was a part-time translator for foreign delegates visiting the university. Her French was better than her Russian, her shoes were always worn, and she smoked like each cigarette was her last word in a debate she was losing. No one really knew her name. Some called her Irina. Others thought she was Nadezhda. But Putin never called her anything. Not out loud. Their first real conversation wasn't about politics or books. It was about silence. He had made a joke in poor French. She didn't laugh. Instead, she looked at him and asked, "Do you always speak before thinking?" He said nothing. She smiled. "Good. That's the first smart thing you've done tonight." And he remembered that. Not because it hurt, but because it didn't. They started meeting in places where no one would notice, a side corridor in the library, the back row of a nearly empty cinema, once even at a church service neither of them believed in. And she would say strange things. Things that made no sense and yet haunted him. "You're going to be powerful one day, Volodya. And I hope when you are, you remember this, not everything you control will stay loyal. And not everything loyal needs your control." He never asked her what she meant. One night, she handed him a folded piece of paper. On it was a line of French poetry. He never showed it to anyone. He never translated it. But he carried it in his wallet for the next 20 years. Then, she vanished. No goodbye. No explanation. One day she was late. The next, she wasn't anywhere. He searched, subtly. A few questions here. A favor called in there. Nothing. Some said she was a spy. Others claimed she fled the country. One even said she was never real to begin with, a projection of guilt, or fantasy, or something in between. But Putin never spoke of her. Except once. Years later, during a private dinner with a foreign diplomat, the topic of first loves came up. He looked at his glass, and simply said, "There was someone, but not." The photo he burned in silence. There's a certain kind of silence only fire understands. He found the photo in a box he hadn't opened in over a decade. It was behind an old passport, tucked in between files with false names and obsolete currencies. The photo itself wasn't dramatic, grainy, off-center, poorly lit. But there she was. Half-turned. Laughing at something he couldn't remember. It must have been taken in spring. The coat she wore was too light for winter, her hair messy from wind, not snow. In the background, the blurred curve of the Neva River. Putin held it like a piece of glass, fragile, dangerous. Not because it would break, but because it might cut through something he'd spent years sealing off. He didn't sit. Didn't blink much. He just stood by the small desk in his dacha, staring at that one frozen moment, wondering why he'd kept it at all. And then he made tea. Not because he wanted it, but because he needed the water to boil. While the kettle hissed behind him, he sat with the photo. Every corner of his training told him to destroy it. Loose ends were a liability. Even sentiment, when buried too deep, could become a weakness. But that wasn't why he hesitated. He hesitated because in that photo, she was laughing. And in all the years since, he couldn't recall a sound to match it. He tried to remember what she'd said that day. Had she told him something important? Was that the day she asked him the question he never answered? It had been raining the night before. He remembered her hair smelling like smoke and something sweet, probably cheap perfume. But the words? They were gone. And that was what haunted him. He didn't fear enemies, betrayal, or even war. But forgetfulness? That was different. Forgetting meant she could vanish again, this time fully. Not just from his life, but from history. The water boiled. He didn't drink the tea. He burned the photo. Slowly. No lighter fluid. No ceremony. Just a match in a metal tray. The image curled inward, blackened at the edges. Her smile disappeared first. Then her outline. Then the background faded into nothing. And he watched. Until the last ember died. Later, that same night, during a meeting with security, the letter she never sent. The handwriting was delicate. Foreign, but familiar. Thin lines. Wide spacing. As if whoever wrote it was afraid to press too hard, afraid the words might scream if written too firmly. He found it tucked inside an old copy of Le Monde Diplomatique from 1980, slid just behind an article about disarmament talks. A strange place to hide a letter, unless, of course, it wasn't meant for him to find. Not then. It wasn't sealed. No envelope. Just a folded piece of aging paper, yellowed at the corners. He opened it with hands steady from training but a pulse that had quickened without permission. Volodya. I won't pretend I understand you. Sometimes I think you're a mirror turned toward the past, reflecting only the things you wish to remember, bending the ones you can't. You rarely speak of feelings, so I'll speak for both of us. You scare me. Not because of who you are, but because of who you're becoming. You want control so badly you forget how to be present. You're already building a fortress and calling it a home. One day, people will follow you. They'll fear you, admire you, perhaps even love you. But I wonder, will anyone truly know you? I hope someone does. Even if it's not me. There was no signature. No date. No address. Just the writing. Faint, confident in its own vulnerability. He read it twice. Then again. And a fourth time. And then he folded it carefully and slid it back between the pages, where it had lived all those years. He did not destroy it. He did not file it. He simply let it return to its hiding place. Later that week, during a casual walk through the Kremlin garden with an old KGB colleague, someone joked about how Putin never forgot anything. Maybe that's your secret, the man said. You don't remember feelings. You remember strategy. Putin didn't respond. But inside his jacket pocket was that same folded paper. Pressed against his chest. Silent, but present. That night, he couldn't sleep. It wasn't guilt. It wasn't loss. It was something else, the street he keeps off all maps. Leningrad had changed. It wasn't just the name, now St. Petersburg again, it was the sound. The rhythm of the streets. In the late 90s, everything felt faster, louder, more desperate. But there was one street that time hadn't touched. It didn't have a name on any city registry. Not officially. Locals called it the Whisper Alley. A narrow path between two decaying apartment blocks. Just wide enough for two people to walk shoulder to shoulder, if they were comfortable with silence. Putin returned there once. Not as president. Not even as deputy mayor. Just as a man. No guards. No entourage. Just a gray coat, his collar up, his eyes shielded by tinted glasses. He walked slowly. The air was damp with thaw. Snowmelt dripping from rusted gutters. At the alley's midpoint, he stopped. There was a door. Wooden. Painted green, once, now peeled and cracked like old varnish. The number was still there, faded black paint, 14C. He didn't knock. He didn't expect anyone to answer. He was looking for something else. Memories don't knock. They break in through the cracks. It was in that building, on the second floor, that she had once lived. A small flat, 2 rooms and a balcony with broken railing. He remembered sneaking up the back stairwell, his boots leaving marks on the stone. They'd sit on the balcony, even in winter, wrapped in blankets, passing cheap cigarettes and plans that would never unfold. She used to write on the walls. Little quotes. Thoughts. Not graffiti, more like whispers. One still remained, faintly etched near the doorframe. He leaned in and read it. Even in the quiet, we echo. He didn't smile. But he paused longer than expected. There was no sound, just the wind, brushing through the narrow alley like breath through a flute. Then came a voice. Velodia? Soft. Unsure. Female. He froze. Turned. A woman, mid-50s, stepped out from a shadowed doorway across the alley. She wore a scarf pulled tight and held a grocery bag. Their eyes met. Recognition danced between them, but neither confirmed it. Not with words. Not with names. Just a look. Then she nodded. Just once. He nodded back. She turned and walked on. No rush. No drama. And he stood there, beneath the faded paint and the broken drain pipe, as if the alley itself had exhaled. He didn't follow. Some streets aren't meant to be walked. The gift she never gave him. There was a box. Not a large one. Old, with brass hinges and velvet lining inside, faded and crushed in corners. It had sat on the top shelf of a closet for decades. Unmarked, unopened. It wasn't labeled because it didn't need to be. He knew exactly what was in it, and more importantly, what wasn't. The box had been meant as a gift. A gesture. But it had never been delivered. He had given it to her once, back in Dresden. Empty. It was a joke, sort of. He had said, "This is for the day I finally tell you everything." She had smiled, then frowned. "That's dangerous," she said. "I might believe you." But she had kept it anyway. Through her transfer to Leningrad. Through the long winters and the silence between them. Through the promotions and the rumors and the way his life slowly built itself away from her. And then she was gone. Not in the dramatic sense. Just gone. No funeral. No letter. No call. Just an empty space in a city filled with noise. Years later, when he quietly visited her sister, under a pseudonym, under a storm of bodyguards she wasn't allowed to acknowledge, she gave him the box back. "She wanted you to have it," she said. She never opened it. Putin hadn't said a word. He had taken the box, nodded once, and left. Now, in the privacy of his country house library, far from the Kremlin, far from judgment, he opened it. Inside was a folded note. Not hers. His. The one he had written the night before leaving Dresden. The one he never gave her. It read, "I don't know how to be soft. They trained that out of me. But with you, I remember who I was before the silence. If I ever become something dangerous, please know, it wasn't because of you. It was because I didn't listen when I should have stayed. I wish I had stayed." The paper trembled slightly in his hands, though he held it steady. His breath was slow, but measured. Not emotionless, contained. He closed the box. Some stories aren't written in history books. They live in silences, in unopened boxes, and in the people we choose never to speak of. If this one made you feel something, pause, even for a moment, then maybe it's not just his story anymore. We'll keep uncovering the hidden moments behind the world's most powerful figures, one forgotten chapter at a time. So if you're curious about what history didn't tell us, don't forget